Okay, ready? Here we go. So we're talking about finances today, okay? So we're talking about finances. So let's start, and we're going to start with the total construction cost, okay? Let's look at this here. We're going to call this the total construction cost. This is the number that the owner gives you. This is a number that the owner has decided is going to be how much the whole entire project cost. It's going to be a huge number. We're talking multiple millions of dollars probably if it's a big project, and it's a very big number. It's the owner's number, okay? So we're talking about the total construction cost is where the whole entire thing begins. We haven't gotten to the architect yet, so we're going to draw a line right here, and we're going to say, boop, just like that. We're going to say that that represents, we haven't even started talking about the architect yet. This is the total construction cost. Let's use a sample number of 10 million. Let's just use a sample number just so that we can go along with actual numbers as we go through this. So here we go. So we got the total construction cost. Another phrase that you might hear this referred to as the total project cost, okay? They love to change around the words just a little bit. They love to not use the exact same terminology, and you got to be careful that if they don't use the exact same terminology, you still know which type of money they're referring to, okay? So here we go. So we got the total construction cost. Sometimes they might call that the total project cost. We're talking about money before the architect's fee. Okay, so now this line represents when we start talking about the architect's firm. So let's say architect's firm. There we go. Okay, that's what this line represents. So let's do this. Let's pull this over here. There we go. Total construction cost, just like that. Okay, cool deal. So now we're talking about the architect's fee. So in the contract between the architect and the owner, they're going to decide what percentage of the total construction cost is going to be for the architect's fee. So they're going to decide that. We're going to say that we're going to call that, there's a percentage of the construction cost, and it's a negotiated number between owner and architect. Okay, so let's just use a sample number. We're just going to say 7%. I'm just making that up. And we're going to say if it's 7%, so here we go. So let's say 7%. There we go, 7%. What is 7% of 10 million? That is 700,000. There we go. There we go, 700,000, okay? So this number, we're going to draw a little arrow. We're going to say that coming out of the total construction cost is the percentage of the negotiation, blah, blah, blah. So let's make this a little arrow here. We're going to make this an arrow. Give me my options here. Give me my stroke options here. Come on. Come on. Stroke. Stroke. Here we go. Got my line. There we go. Give me an arrow. Boom. All right, give me some thickness so I can actually see the arrow. Okay, there we go. So out of the total construction cost, they agreed to a little percentage. Let's say that we're going to use 7% here. That's fine. And we now have $700,000, okay? This $700,000 is what we're going to call the gross fee. That is the gross architect's fee. This is a very important term in this whole document. We're going to call this the gross fee. This is where you start when we're talking about the architect's number, okay? The total construction cost is not technically as important to all the calculations that we're doing. It's really just the starting point. But now we're talking about the architect's fee, the gross fee. This is a really important number. It's where all the architect's fees come from. So look at the gross fee. Okay, so the gross fee is $700,000. And let me also do this here. We're also going to put some little sub-labels because just like with total construction costs, they love to modify the terms slightly just to make sure that you're on your heels and that you're paying attention to what they mean when they say the total design fee. Total design fee. Or they might call it the total for the architect's team, right? You have to know what that means. Total for the architect's team. Okay? And let's also, I just want to make sure that we don't just say what it's also called, but I also tell you the definition right here. So let's also say that the definition is, it's the fee for everything. No deductions yet. No deductions yet. Okay, we're talking in reference to the architect's firm. So let's do this. Let's make that blue. That way you can see the definition. Okay? As we go down this document, we're just going to start deducting stuff from this gross fee. So when you talk about the gross fee, this is the beginning number, and there's no deductions yet. So now let's talk about the first deduction, okay? So let's have an arrow coming out of the gross fee. Whoops, there we go. We're going to have it be like this. We're going to do like this. And we're going to say that the next big number is direct expenses. Here we go, direct expenses. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. I'm going to say that direct expenses breaks down into 2 subcategories. Let's make this a little smaller so we're not confused. Okay. We're going to say that direct expenses breaks into 2 types. Okay. Here we go. We're going to do this. We're going to reflect it. Yeah, there you go. And we're going to put this over here. There are 2 kinds of direct expenses. There are project expenses and there are consultant expenses. Consultant expenses comes first. Consultant. We're going to call that the consultant fee. Consultant fees. And we're going to call this project expenses. There we go. Okay. And let's bring these down in size so that we maintain our hierarchy here. Actually, I want this one to come down too. There we go. Direct expenses. So let's give ourselves some categorization here. Yeah, I like that. Nice. Okay. So we're going to start with the consultant fees. That's what comes first. That's the first thing you're going to take out of the gross fee. Okay, we're going to get to project expenses in a second. So the consultant fee, this is also going to be a big chunk of the gross fee. It could be something like 35%. That's like a big chunk. That's kind of within the range of what we're thinking when we talk about taking a big chunk of the consultant fees to pay for the consultants out of your gross fee. So let's say that we're going to call this the fee for consultants. Yes. Okay. And we're going to say the direct expenses minus the consultant fees equals, here we go, equals, let's say equals, drum roll please, the NSR, the net service revenue. We're going to call that NSR. There we go. Boom. Okay. So the NSR is a number that you will see, but do not get this confused with the NOR, which is going to come a little bit later on. It's okay. Don't be confused. We're going to get to it in a second, and it's all going to come clear. So here we go. So we got the direct expenses. The first thing you're going to take out of that, that's why this is on the left side, is the consultant fees. The consultant fees might be something like 35%. And we're going to say that the fee for the consultants, after that's been subtracted, the gross fee would then be the net service revenue. Okay, so think of it as gross fee minus consultant fees equals NSR. Okay, so let's do this here. The NSR, we're going to say that that's remaining project expenses have yet to be deducted. That's kind of what NSR means. It means that any expenses besides consultant fees have yet to be deducted. It sort of tells you only the consultants were paid. That's like the only thing we've done with our gross fee. That's what NSR tells you. Okay, so here we go. So we got our direct expenses breaks down into 2 different categories. What comes after you've paid the consultant fees? Next is project expenses. And project expenses breaks down into 3 categories. Those categories are reimbursables, the reimbursables, the non-reimbursables, right? And contingency. Okay, contingency is one that I often hear people don't mention. Maybe that means that it's not as important as reimbursables and non-reimbursables, but it does fit into this category. Contingency. Did I spell that right? Contingency. So these three are all project expenses. So watch what I'm going to do here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And I'm going to do this. Bump, 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 bump. There we go. And I'm going to bump that up a little bit. And then we're going to say bump, bump. And we're going to do like that. So project expenses, you want to know what it means if someone says that, but you may hear reimbursables and non-reimbursables, and you need to know that that means, oh, okay, that's underneath the umbrella of project expenses. Project expenses is talking about it's going on the project, okay? We haven't yet gotten to salary. That would be going towards an employee, and that would be called labor. But this is project expenses, okay? We're getting to labor later. Right now we're talking about the consultant fees and the project expenses, and let's do this. So what exactly are reimbursables and non-reimbursables? The reimbursables are you are paying for something that's just related to the project, but the client agrees, oh, okay, they'd pay you back for that. So you had to stay at the hotel near the job site, okay? You had to pay to plot out those giant drawings to bring them to the site, yeah. A rental car, okay, you had to drive really far away, or you had to fly somewhere and then you had to rent a car, okay, that's fine. Tolls while you were driving to the site, that might happen. Okay, travel payment in general. So these are things that the client agrees, like, okay, yeah, you have to pay for these. It's your credit card that's going to be swiping when you pay for these things, so I will pay you back for that stuff. So reimbursables, okay. What about non-reimbursables? This one's a little bit harder to understand, but it makes sense that it exists. This would be, you won't be reimbursed, but you did have to pay for it anyway. So you won't be reimbursed per the contract necessarily, but you did buy it. You did swipe your credit card, but you did buy it, and you did buy it on company time and while you were working on the project or something. The best example I can think of this, but you did buy it with company money. The best example I can think of this is like you were traveling for a job site and you had to stop and have dinner, and you got alcohol when you were at dinner. Okay, like paying for dinner would be covered by the client. You know, you got to eat. But if you decided to buy like the 3-course dessert, like, okay, I mean, now we're talking about, now you just bought that just for yourself. So you didn't need that to get the project done. So we're going to now say that like alcohol at dinner. That's just a good example. So as you can see, I don't have a million great examples of non-reimbursables, but you can see how that's slightly different than reimbursable. You swiped your credit card. You had to pay for it. You used the company credit card because you were also buying other stuff like regular dinner, and you're just not going to get reimbursed for it. So it was a project expense. So here we go. So what is contingency? That is just a little bit of money set aside for the just in case. A little bit of extra money. Here we go. Extra money set aside just in case. A good architect would always account for contingency. There's a percentage of the contingency agreed upon in the contract. It's probably a small amount, but it's a little extra bag of money set aside just in case something goes wrong, something costs more than you thought. Lots of things cost more than you thought, and you're prepared. So contingency, reimbursables, and non-reimbursables, these are money that you're spending that are related to the project, okay? And we're going to call all these project expenses, we're going to call the consultant fees, and when these two items come out of the gross fee, we now have a very, very important term called the NOR. We talked about that earlier, the net operating revenue. The net operating revenue. This is a very, very, very important term, and it's where all the rubber hits the road. So the gross fee is important because it's where you start. The net operating revenue is where you start working, okay? So after net operating revenue, we're going to get down to labor. We're going to get down to your staff and who's on the project and who's going to be working how many hours. But before we get that, we need to make sure we spend a lot of time understanding the importance of the NOR. Let me make sure that I do this too. I'm going to say NOR. Okay. You love talking about the NOR, okay? We love talking about this stuff. So whenever you're talking about it, don't be a noob and don't say the net operating revenue. Call it the NOR. That's how you know you're cool and you talk about this stuff all the time. So you got the net operating revenue, and we're going to put a definition to this. We're going to say total available for project labor, okay? If you hear the words project labor, that's telling you, okay, we're talking about after we've reached NOR, okay? We've already paid our consultants, we've already paid the project expenses, okay? All that came out of the gross fee. After we've project labor comes after the NOR, okay? So when you hear project labor, that's what that should be telling you. Okay, so here we go. So we're going to say gross fee, and then let's do this here. We're going to say boom, boom, boom. That's going to be an arrow, and we're going to do like this. Let's make it like this. Let's give it an arrow. Whoops, we want it to go that way. When we say, here we go. These arrows are so finicky. Let's do this too. When we say the direct expenses minus, or excuse me, the gross fee minus the direct expenses equals, let's do this here. Let's make this red. Yeah. And we're going to make this red. Yeah. I like that. Going to make this red. Yes. Okay, let's bring this over here. Okay, so, and then let's do this. I like the idea of making this red. That's great. These are like the really important terms. These are the big important terms compared to all the terms that are on this sheet. The purpose of this sheet is to help you make sense of when you hear project expenses. What is that an umbrella for? Contingency, what umbrella does that fall under? Okay, this is the order, this is the hierarchy of how we're spending money. Okay, so here we go. So we finally reached our NOR. We've already spent the consultant fees, in which we have an NSR, if you want to call it only consultant fees was deducted. And then you also take out your project expenses. We have now reached the NOR. Gross fee minus consultant fees and project expenses equals NOR, our net operating revenue. This is, in other terms, this is the project labor budget. Project labor budget. Remember what I said earlier? When you hear project labor, you should be thinking, oh, okay, the NOR has already been reached. So, project labor budget, another way you might call that, net revenue. They just simplify it to net revenue. Got to be very careful with that one. Make sure to read your context clues, because if you see net revenue and you might be confused with this, read your context clues. Make sure you know which one we're talking about. So they may not even say they may just say net revenue and assume, and they expect you to assume that they're talking about the NOR. Make sure that you know. So let's now say what happens after the net operating revenue. What are we paying for next? The next thing we're going to be paying for is operating expenses. Operating expenses. Okay, that's vague. What does that mean? We're going to say that operating expenses breaks down into several categories. The categories are direct labor. There we go. There's that word labor that we were waiting for. Direct labor. And then also indirect labor. Okay, here we go. Indirect labor. And the last one, indirect expenses. Ooh, interesting. Indirect expenses. Okay, so we're going to say that, here we go. We're going to say that operating expenses breaks down into these three categories. And we're going to copy our little guy like this. Yes, I like that. Let's do this like that. Nice. Okay, and the reason I've done this is because if you hear the word operating expenses, you're going to need to know, wait a minute, where are we in reference of the whole entire chart? Okay, direct labor, indirect labor, these are items that actually have quantities, financial quantities associated with them. But if you hear operating expenses, you don't want to get confused. Operating expenses refers to after the NOR, direct labor is included in that, indirect labor is included in that, and indirect expenses are included in that. We're going to say that there's one more little broad category like that, and we're going to say that people can categorize overhead as these last two. Okay, so watch this. Boom, boom, Boom. Okay, so that's how that works. Okay, so direct labor, and indirect expenses, these are all what come after the NOR. These are operating expenses, but you're definitely going to hear the term overhead, and when people say overhead, they are talking about just the indirect stuff. Okay, so let's define direct labor. This is this is the only thing that generates revenue. That's pretty easy to remember, huh? It's the only thing that generates revenue. Seriously, all this stuff, and you're generating revenue from one source. Okay, so direct labor, the only thing that generates revenue. Okay, you can say, we can just add some more information here. We can say that this is shown as a dollar or time amount. Depends on what document you're looking at, but be able to think of it in that way. So, and then, we're going to say, it's probably going to be in terms of hours. Okay, so we've got direct labor, okay, and we're then going to talk about indirect labor. Direct labor, this is your staff, this is your architectural staff that's working on projects. They are doing billable time, they're doing billable work, and you can bill a client saying, we did red lines, we produced that CD package, okay? That's what's going to earn you revenue back. Your indirect labor is referring to staff who were not working on a project, okay? That's your receptionist, okay? That's your marketing team, something like that. Here we go, indirect labor. That is going to be not billable time. Not billable time. That staff member is paid a salary, but they never do anything that is billable. Now, indirect labor also refers to the hours that a staff member worked. Here we go. Indirect labor also refers to the hours that an architectural staff spent not doing billable work. Okay, maybe they spent 1 hour watering the plants. Maybe they spent an extra hour eating lunch. Okay, they got paid to be there for their 8 hours a day on salary. But if they weren't doing billable time, then that hour that they spent would be indirect labor. Okay, so not billable time, marketing, accounting, admin, stuff like that. HR. Okay. And last but not least, we're talking about indirect expenses. This is overhead, right? Maybe you can guess what kind of things might fall underneath here. Your taxes, your rent. This is your rent for the your architectural office that you go to. Software licenses. Here we go. Printers licenses. Printers, plotters, printers. Insurance. Okay, insurance is in there. Health benefits for your employees. Okay. So we're almost at the end here. We've been talking about how the major items are the gross fee, which comes out of the total construction cost. Okay. Then, after you've subtracted consultant fees and all the project expenses, boom, you got the NOR. You're now going to do project labor, okay? So once you've started to do your project labor, let's do another one of these bad boys. What? Like that. Actually, let's do this here. We're gonna bring this over here like this, and we're gonna use this again. We're gonna say, this is getting so funky. I think I'm just gonna draw a new arrow because that's how funky. There we go. And we're gonna give this a little arrowhead just like this. Come on, baby. Yeah, switch. Okay. So when we say the net operating revenue minus the operating expenses, what do you get? Can you guess what comes at the end of this? What happens after you've taken your revenue and you've subtracted your expenses? Dun 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 dun. Profit. Yes. Yes. The Holy Trinity. Expenses, revenue, profit. The Holy Trinity. Expenses, revenue, profit. You can think of those as a triangle. Whenever you have revenue and then you take away expenses, the result is profit. Okay? So those three things go together. And those three things can be applied to 1 year. They could be applied to 1 month. They could be applied to 1 project. They could be applied to 1 task. Just think about the relationship between revenue, profit, and expenses. Okay, so here we go. So let's make sure that we have our appropriate amount of importance on all of our items here. Profit is a really big, important one. I don't know if it's as important as the NOR, to be honest, so let's shrink that down. And let's also get some more space here. Boom. Okay, so here we go. So we got our gross fee. That will eventually become the NOR. And once we've taken out all of our expenses, we now have our profit. You've already paid your salary to your employees. That's the biggest expense, and it's now going to go to the profit that we have left over. So we can define this as, we can define it as how much money was made. And this may also be referred to as net profit. They may call this net profit. And if you see that, you want to know that they're talking about the profit after all the expenses were taken out of the revenue. So let's call this net profit. Okay, so we're going to say that, let's put a little equal sign here. There we go. So this is a little scratchy, right? It's a little bit rough. I whipped it up very quickly, but it's very important to understand the relationship between all of these costs, okay? You're going to be reading, you're going to be studying, and you're just going to see the word non-reimbursables thrown out at you, and you're just going to see overhead thrown out at you, okay? But then later on, you're going to see direct labor, and you're not going to understand where everything falls underneath what umbrella, and you want to be able to make sense of it. So that's the purpose of this document. That's the purpose of me breaking it down. And I reference this document all the time. Whenever I'm studying, I have it pulled up on the left of me. I have it drawn out. I've written it by hand. I have it memorized in my brain. I have this like gross fees at the top, net operating revenue is big and in the center, and profit is down at the bottom, so that whenever I'm reading a problem and I see them talking about direct labor or NOR, I remember, okay, what part of the project are we at? Who have we paid already? What payment or what expense is about to come next? So it's very important to make sense of all the terms, find out where they fall, and use this to just clarify what all the terms mean. So best of luck.